Pandemics are far from perfection when it comes to having to make decisions quickly. And can I tell you hand on heart that one of the most difficult decisions I've made personally and the government's made during this pandemic has been closing the New South Wales-Victorian border. It was a decision of last resort. And in fact, I remember getting heavily criticised for not moving earlier. And one of the main reasons we didn't move earlier was because we knew the disruption and angst it would cause people in the border communities. And for all of you, you don't see yourselves as a state border, as two communities, but one. And I deeply appreciate what that government decision has resulted in terms of the disruption and angst felt by many. And I want to say how deeply I regret everybody's challenges during this time, but please know you're not alone. We've had many people on both sides of the border, within the border communities and outside the border communities, who've been deeply impacted by the pandemic. And as the Victorian numbers continue to decline, that gives us greater confidence to ease restrictions and to listen to the concerns raised by border communities. Can I, on this occasion, thank a number of community leaders for their support. Firstly, to my parliamentary colleague, Justin Clancy, who has been outstanding. Please know that he has very much been on the side of his community and raised with me almost initially on a daily basis, but certainly at least every couple of days through direct phone calls, meetings and other forms of communication, the concerns expressed by his community, especially when the initial 50-kilometre zone was reduced and the impacts it had. And I regret deeply the fact that the community wasn't prepared for what we had to do at that time. And I want to assure everybody that Justin's advocacy until this point in time has been outstanding. And any frustration people feel should be against me and nobody else. I'm the leader and the buck stops with me. And I want people to appreciate that every decision we take is in the interests of our citizens. The alternative to what we did could have resulted in high rates of infection in rural and regional New South Wales, not just on the border communities, but throughout the state. And we have had a few close calls in respect to the virus seeping into or seeding into regional communities and border communities. But our health officials have done an outstanding job in contact tracing. I also wanted to acknowledge Justin's colleague on the other side of the border, Mr Tilley, for his advocacy, and I know his community is equally anxious about the changes that have occurred. Can I acknowledge Superintendent Smith and all the local police officers who have done an outstanding job? And we were just commenting outside that I don't think either of us expected to be in this situation, but he's leading about 500 men and women of the New South Wales Police Force in supporting our border restrictions. And I also want to thank the members of the Australian Defence Forces who still have around 400 people on the ground, and thank them for their unstinting support. Often they're the ones that have to face the public every day. They're the ones that have to face people who feel let down or frustrated, and I just wanted to thank them on behalf of all the people of New South Wales for their efforts. And please know that we appreciate everything you have done. Pleasingly, having obviously heard the sustained concerns of the community and seeing the rates of infection in Victoria decline, from this Friday, the border community, the border region, will be extended to that initial 50 kilometres on either side of the border. Service New South Wales and the community has a few days to adjust to that. We wanted to make sure that unlike previous changes, we gave as much notice as possible so that people would be able to start planning ahead. Of course, any movements outside the border communities comes with additional restrictions, but in terms of people being able to tend to their daily life without unnecessary stress, we hope from Friday life will change in a positive way for people. But as Superintendent Smith mentioned to me, we've had in excess of 1.2 million movements, to and from the border communities in the last 6 weeks, and that's a large number of movements. But having said that, we appreciate that from Friday life will be much easier and less stressful for people living on either side of the border. I also want to add, and I don't make this as a criticism, but I just want people to appreciate where we're coming from, is it has been difficult for us to get information on the other side of the border about rates of testing, community transmission, and that has in part led to our angst about how we can move forward. It's really important for us to understand what's happening on the other side of the border, and I know my counterpart, Premier Andrews, is going through a difficult time, but pleasingly the numbers are coming down, and that gives us greater confidence in relation to what's happening alongside the border communities south of the border. Unlike our side of the border, we know that if we have any suspected cases or contact tracing or testing, we're able to jump onto it straight away. We don't have that level of confidence on the other side, only because we're not in charge of the system on the other side, and therefore we have to make sure that we're not introducing unnecessary risk into our regional communities here in New South Wales. We've also made sure that we've supported the Victorian government in any way we can, because the risk to New South Wales and to our border communities is greatly reduced when the number of cases in Victoria come down. And of course we want that to be sustainable, and we hope once restrictions in Victoria are eased that they're able to maintain that level of low number of cases, because that is what will ensure that we don't need to leave the border open a single day more than what we have to. I mean, that is our aim. I was very hesitant in closing the border. But we won't be hesitant, we won't leave it a day longer than we need to, but we have to make sure it's the right thing to do at the right time, and it's in order to make sure we keep the community safe. And I'd rather be having this conversation with all of you today than having a conversation about why there are hundreds of cases in regional New South Wales because of what's happening in Victoria. And that's certainly a conversation I would never want to have. What we've done at all stages during the pandemic, especially in the last 6 or 7 weeks, is make sure we didn't go down the path of Victoria. And that's why we worked overtime, because now, even though I know it's frustrating for many people in this community, and also in Wodonga, and along 27, or there's 55 places where you can cross the border, but 27 main ones. And we know how stressful it is for everybody along those communities, but think of the alternative, which would have been, had we had to have shut down New South Wales, none of us would be moving around as freely as we are. Businesses wouldn't be able to do anything. And so as difficult as it's been, please know the decision of the government, my decision, was coming from a place of good intention. And of course, as I said, we won't leave the border closed for a day longer than we need to.